Good afternoon. My name is Mary Lucy Spoke, and we are here today on behalf of the Ontario Coalition Against Gambling Expansion, or OCAGE. We are a grassroots organization from all over the province, from a variety of ages, political conviction, incomes, and background. In a moment, I'll introduce our guest speaker, Professor John Warren Kindt, but first I will tell you a few words of why we are here. Shortly after this government was elected on a platform of opposing casino, gambling minister Norm Sterling promised no more slot machines. Now we have about 8,000 machines in 3 massive casinos, and the government is now putting in place a computerized management system that will handle 20,000 more slot machines. In other words, 1 for every 400 adults in the province. In a short while still, we are to see 18 racetracks turn into slot machine casinos, what we call racinos. 4 towns will receive supersized so-called charity casinos, or sometimes after the election, up to 40 more towns could receive local casinos. OCAGE intends to make Ontarians aware of the disastrous consequences that this policy will generate. And this is why Professor Kindt is here with us. OCAGE is asking for the 6 following things. Number 1, a moratorium on gambling expansion. Number 2, a comprehensive independent study on the social, economic, and legal issues. Number 3, the development of standard public consultation process. Number 4, legislation providing community regulatory authority or veto. Number 5, legislation for public education and consumer disclosure of odds and risk. And number 6, limits on gambling promotion and stronger government regulation and accountability. Professor Kindt from the United States has served in several federal and state government positions. He was a senior fellow at the London School of Economics and is currently Professor of Commerce and Business Administration at the University of Illinois. Professor Kindt holds several graduate degrees in law and business and has written extensively in the area of legalized gambling's social and economic impacts. He has appeared at numerous U.S. congressional and state legislative hearings on gambling. Professor Kindt will give us the benefit of his research into the economics of gambling.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction. I should state that this group has invited me here, and since this has become an issue in the United States, let me preface my remarks by stating that I don't accept any consultant fees or honoraria for doing this type of work. We view this at my university as simply an educational process in presenting our research and our summary of research from around the country and indeed around the world. This group, however, is very motivated. They gave me about 3 hours worth of sleep last night after a presentation in Clinton, Ontario, as they were moving me here to be for this press conference today. So if my voice cracks a little bit, you know these professors. But just to summarize the basics of gambling and what it does on an economic or socioeconomic basis, the proper way to view this is by the speed of the gambling, not the type of gambling, but the speed of the gambling. The speed of the gambling is important because it relates to how fast the money is coming out of the public or how fast it's coming out of the economy. And so the proper way to view this is sort of like a target with a bullet or a bullseye in the middle, and in the middle is let's just say the casino, which is the most aggressive type of gambling, and around that is the 35-mile feeder market, and around that is the 100-mile feeder market. And the public should ask why the casinos themselves and the gambling industry call these feeder markets. Well, it's because the money is coming out of these feeder markets and going into the bullseye, which is the gambling activity. And let me also indicate that video gambling machines, slot machines are some of the more aggressive types of gambling because they're faster. They bring in the money faster, people lose their money, And gambling is basically an economic loser. It's based on how much people lose. The government perhaps wins, but in summary of our research, the national statistics from the United States and Canada indicate that for every $1 in benefits, the socioeconomic costs are at least $3 to perhaps $7, and some studies are even higher than that. So every $1 that's coming in, and it can be for charitable purposes or increased tax revenues, it can go to a worthwhile racing industry, it can go to help some other economic development or charity, but for every $1 that's coming in new benefits, the socioeconomic costs to the taxpayers are at least $3, and there are higher numbers that go up to $4, $5, $6, $7 in costs for every $1 in new tax revenues coming in. And for each one job that's being created in the gambling activity, if you look at the feeder market, you're probably losing one job out of that feeder market. As people spend their money, they're generally spending less on other types of goods, and therefore those monies are lost to the traditional or pre-existing economy. And therefore, for every one job that's being created, you're probably losing one, and in some instances, more than one job from the regional economy. The proper scope is to look at what is happening in the feeder markets, what is happening regionally. Now, the ABCs of legalized gambling, which make it different from any other type of activity, are basically addictions, bankruptcy, and crime and corruption. The addictions is related to pathological gambling. When governments legalize gambling and promote it, they are in fact creating and encouraging new pathological gamblers, a recognized addictive behavior pursuant to the American Psychiatric Association. And it's listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's a recognized addictive behavior. Secondly, government is actually promoting new bankruptcies. In studies in the United States, a definitive study actually done in 1997 and sponsored by the objective banking industry in the United States indicated that legalized gambling was the third to fourth leading cause of bankruptcies in the United States, depending on how you interpret the data. It was the fastest growing cause of bankruptcies in the United States. And in the year 1997, it cost each household approximately $40 per U.S. household, and by the year 2000, it was projected to cost each household $220. So this is a very large economic problem coming online. The third category is crime and corruption. In studies, we've seen that in those areas or counties that have gambling versus non-gambling counties, the crime rate is increasing 100% faster than in the non-gambling counties. And let's just use casinos again as a virulent form of gambling, a fast form of gambling. The types of crimes that we're seeing occur are property crimes, that is, crimes designed to get money, increased embezzlements, bankruptcy, and fraud. So those are the types of crimes which are occurring in the most authoritative studies that we have to date. The final thing that I would indicate before getting into some more detail is that the United States Congress was so concerned about this that in 1994, 1995, they had congressional hearings, and in 1996, they passed into law a U.S. National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which, by the way, passed both houses of Congress by unanimous voice vote. Even the gambling interests would not vote against it because they realized there was overwhelming support by the Congress to establish a national commission to investigate this trend of gambling throughout the United States and its expansion. That commission is designed to give its final report here in 1999, in the summer of 1999. So the objective analyses of these, I believe, will indicate that when you add up the negatives of addictions, bankruptcies, crime and corruption, and the costs that are entailed with those, and compare those with the benefits, that it's not a close call. The negatives simply overwhelm the benefits. And do we now take questions, or how do we?
Yes. Does
Obviously, that was a pretty good lecture. I didn't even notice the press over here.
Sorry, the press, just to let you know, can actually watch via that TV
Sure.
as well in their offices. What I was just wondering, is the current state that Ontario's in, and I missed the first part of your speech, but is the current amount of gambling Ontario has, I mean, is that all right, or, I mean, they're talking about further expansions, 44. I mean, we're not like Vegas or I gather New Jersey where there's just
But who's
casino.
sponsoring the gambling? The United States, with all due respect to our neighbors here in Canada, has the leading technology when it comes to gambling. And in fact, this technology is now being exported overseas, and the philosophy itself is being exported to other countries. And there's a reason for that, and that is because within the last 5 years, the gambling industry has basically lost 90% of its initiatives before the voters. As these negatives have come online, the voters have seen what is going on, and they've started to vote against gambling. And so the gambling is being exported, and the gambling industry will tell you at their summit conferences that they have to get out of the United States. The world is their oyster, the world is their market, and the backlash is going on in the United States. And while other countries that have experimented with gambling are getting off the bandwagon, Canada appears to be getting on the bandwagon. Your economy is not saturated by any means. You're about 5 years behind where the United States was some years ago in this process. So I don't mean to be presumptuous, but let me give a couple of worldwide examples. Turkey brought in casinos in 1983. They were told that this was genuine economic development. This year, they recriminalized casinos. They're basically thrown them out because of the pathological gambling, the bankruptcies, and the crime and corruption that's been associated with it. India has had a nationwide lottery. Just this year, they recriminalized it. They threw it out. The industry from the U.S. was over there saying, look, you're going to lose all these jobs. You're a poor country, India. And India said, no, this makes poor people poorer. It's a regressive tax on the poor. It's going to hurt our jobs. It's going to create more social costs than the benefits coming in. So we're recriminalizing. And the state of Arizona in the United States, just this last election cycle, has basically said that the Arizona lottery is going to be gone by the year 2003, I believe it is. They're throwing out their lottery. And if you look at the chronology of their lottery as an example, you'll see it starts out great, but then the crime and corruption seeps in, and these negatives are experienced by the public, and the public says it's time to go.
How long does it take for the full negative impacts to take root? I don't imagine it happens overnight. I mean, people probably start going and going and going.
Good question. Do I need to repeat the questions by any way? That's not necessary? Okay. Since I asked my question, now maybe you want to repeat your question. Now, how long does it take? It depends on the speed of the gambling. And so socioeconomists call lotteries and horse tracks the marijuana of creating these negatives. They call casinos, video gambling machines, and video slots the crack cocaine of creating new gambling addicts, new bankruptcies, new crime and corruption, because the speed is so much faster. If you go to a dog track, for example, or a horse track, you bet once an hour or once every half an hour. In the lottery, it used to be once a week, and then it's twice a week. Now it's every day. We've got the instant games, more and more jackpots. The gambling cannibalizes the pre-existing economy. Notice today's headlines. In both of your national newspapers, it talks about, I think there was something to the effect of MPs say, let's get rid of everything that hurts the economy. Legalized gambling hurts the economy. There was a report from OECD saying, Canada, watch out for your economy in the next few years. Well, legalized gambling is reverse pump priming. If you were to simply wipe the slate clean, and by the way, that's happened in economic history many times. And I'll give you a specific example. If you wipe the slate clean, all that money that's going into gambling would be pump primed back into the economy and would help the economy. And conversely, part of the
government never get back the amount of revenue that it's getting from the casinos.
That is the public policy decision that needs to be made, and the Ford Foundation did a study about 4 years ago which helped prompt this U.S. National Commission that said, look at what government's doing here. They're getting addicted to the revenues, and all of these negatives are going to start coming online, but they just can't give it up. They can't give up the revenues. But other things would generate revenues. But the reason the decriminalization of drugs is an example that's given among socioeconomists. But you don't do it because the negatives are well established and it would hurt.
If I could go back to my original question though, how long do you think in Ontario's case it will be before you hear about or we see the full negative impact of the creation of, what, 4 casinos?
Well, theoretically, you have to get to where you've saturated the economy before you feel the full impact. Let's take an example of Nevada. Nevada is a saturated gambling economy. And you've raised a good question. Do you want to be a gambling economy or a non-gambling economy? Utah, the governor is advertising his state as a non-gambling economy and saying businesses come here because your employees won't get addicted to gambling. We've got good job creation. We're number 1 or 2 in personal income growth. So you have to make the decision. And if you put a fence up around Nevada, the way to visualize this, that economy would collapse within a short time because it would feed off of itself. It's saturated gambling. The Nevada economy would collapse. It survives because it brings in 80 to 90% tourists from the other 49 states and indeed around the world. Basically, it's living off of Southern California. People who drop their money and take all these problems back to the rest of the country. But that's not what's happening. Gambling is now out of the box. It's out of Las Vegas, and it's come to your country, our communities, and said we're economic development, which it isn't. So it's a question of how long does it take to saturate. I published an article in 1994 which projected some of these negatives coming online, and I did like a 5-year projection and then like 20 years, and actually some of it has started to come along much faster than what I was being conservative in those projections. And there are a lot of studies since then that have just confirmed what I projected, including studies by the casino industry itself. And let me give you a specific example. The casino industry, or gambling industry, sponsored a study by Harvard University to analyze the projected increase in pathological gambling. Their own study admits that in the United States, between 1994 and 1997, another 0.5% of the public became pathological gamblers. As gambling spread, and it's linked to the spread and to the legalization, what's called the acceptability factor and the accessibility factor, it's linked to that. So the more gambling you have, the more of these negatives, the more pathological gamblers. 0.5% of the public. Each new pathological gambler costs society between $10,000 and $52,000 to $60,000 per year. Just take the most conservative number. The industry itself admits 1.5 million new pathological gamblers in the United States. Multiply that by about 10,000. You can see it's a $1 billion problem. What about Canada? In the case of Canada, you're probably going to have similar types of increases as the casino-style gambling or the gambling in the dog tracks, etc., which is video slots, comes online. And as that comes online, you'll see more and more of this.
Now you referred to, I believe it was Turkey, which removed, recriminalized, what was it that Turkey recriminalized?
Casinos.
Casinos.
They had...
Sorry, and India did the same with the lottery, and you
Right.
also referred to Arizona. But is there a North American? 2 questions. Is there a North American case where jurisdiction has actually had a referendum somewhere in the states and said no, we do not want casinos? And secondly, does there ever come a point where a jurisdiction likely reaches the point of no return in terms of turning its back away from gambling? You've referred to Turkey.
Yeah.
But
Let me give you 2 examples from the United States. One is the state of Missouri, which in its spring elections, I believe April of 1994, on the ballot, and let me preface this remark by saying generally the industry does not want to allow the public to vote on these issues. In the United States, practically all of the casino-style gambling has come in through the legislature without a public vote, through the back door, through Native American gambling, through other types of instances where the public has not been allowed to vote. And that is because polls in the United States, in Illinois, for example, show that 2/3 of the public are against gambling as a social policy or legalization of gambling, and 82% to 81% want the right to vote before there's any expansion of gambling. But back to Missouri. In 1994, April, I believe it was, they had an election where it did get on the ballot. I believe it was forced on the ballot by some type of legal action at the time. And the public of Missouri voted against the retention of video gambling in particular on the riverboats. And the riverboats basically said, well, we're going to have to close down if we don't have the video gambling machines, because that's 70% of our revenue.
Was that the only place where they were in Missouri, on the boats?
The casino-style gambling, the only place it was on the casino boats. Some of them were permanently docked in moats. They're called boats in a moat. So they're really land-based casino-style gambling. But that's another issue. Within a few short weeks, the gambling industry literally forced through a new vote. And so there was 6 months later in November, there was a new vote on the same issue, put back on the ballot by the legislature through lobbying activities. This has been in all the media, and with $10 to $15 million in PR advertising, they won that with I believe about 52 to 53% of the vote, where they allowed the video gambling back onto the river boats in Missouri. This year, it was back on the ballot again in another test case. And the gambling interests said that they would lose, I believe, 10,000 jobs if they were closed down, spent theoretically $10 to $15 million again. The final reports aren't in yet. And the opposition, by the way, is just spending nickels and dimes. The opposition was about $225,000 to a $10 to $15 million comparison campaign. And the opposition, anti-gamblers, got 47% of the vote approximately. Not
Is there
want.
come a point where there is a point of no return? I mean, obviously Missouri's going through the experience where you get, the industry, making claims that this is going to lose that many jobs. I mean, is Ontario at the point of no return, or can we?
Ontario has the capacity, from what I've seen, looking at its demographics, for a lot more gambling. And it is my understanding that one of the firms looking at this has actually divided up in the province into about 40 different feeder markets. And you ought to ask why they call them feeder markets. It's because they're feeding off of the money that's coming out of the economy in that market. And the idea is to take the maximum amount of money out of each feeder market. This is money going out of the economy. Now, what you do with it is a nice social debate, and people like to say, well, some goes to charity, some goes to government, but the point is it's coming out of your economy. Other questions? Well, thanks for those good questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.